Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Ilkari, I would like to thank you for joining our webinar, Rethinking Cloud Infrastructure. We will just give all the other participants a few minutes to arrive. So in the meantime, we're going to share a poll in our chat. The poll will be the real cost of a cloud outage. There are some silly answers, some more cheeky answers. Feel free to also submit your own very real cloud outage pain points, and we'll get back to this later on in the session. Perfect. We're seeing some come in. Too many memes. That's great. Too many memes. Sleepless nights for engineering, excess caffeine consumption. I believe all of us here today can probably relate to that one, especially some of our panelists. And for anyone else who's now joining us, welcome again to the webinar, Rethinking Cloud Infrastructure. Perfect. So we will leave it open for just a little bit, but while everyone else is arriving, we'll go over some housekeeping bits. So do feel free to use the chat throughout the webinar. We'll be monitoring it if you have any comments. We'll also be running some polls later on in the chat as well. We'll let you know when. We will also have time at the end of the session for questions. If you have any sessions throughout the session, feel free to leave them in the Q&A section, which you can see or activate at the top of your screens. And we will be screen sharing as well at some moments. So if you want to just focus on the speaker view, you can head to the view section and just select speakers as well. So let's see how we're doing. We're filling up. Any more answers to our poll? More sleepless nights for engineering. No angry CFOs though, that's good news, Juan, right? Perfect. Well, I will, I say we crack on. So again, welcome. And first off, I'm Heather Rogerson. I currently head up our demand gen at Ilkari for our B2B services and delighted to be moderating today's panel. Before I introduce who will be speaking, I'd like to tell you a bit about Ilkari. We are a European company originally from Ireland, and we offer sovereign digital infrastructure services worldwide, specifically colocation, cloud, and domain name services, including several data centers and offices located around the world. I'll keep it brief so we can get to the topic that brings us here today, but I would love to introduce the experts who will lead today's discussion. So welcome. Thank you for giving us your time today. First up, we have James McLeod. He is our CTO at Ilkari and has over 20 years experience in IT architecture, development, and digitalization. Very compliance, security, privacy focused. We also have our CCO, Juan Aguirre, who has a very vast understanding of digital infrastructure and sovereignty needs across different European markets. And finally, we have Aritza, who's product manager for cloud and platform services. So on the front line of designing our cloud and computing solutions for the current market needs. So welcome. Thanks for joining us. Hopefully everyone is here by now. So I think that's enough from me. Let's get into the questions. Juan, this first one is for you. What would you say are the key demands or priorities for businesses when it comes to cloud infrastructure?
Vast topic, and it partly depends on where a company is in its life cycle. So I can go on some of the research we commissioned and some of our customer feedback. The first one, I believe, which is on top of everybody's agenda, is reliability. right? Your business runs on cloud. Your customers rely on you. If a cloud goes down, that's a key issue. So reliability is number one. Okay, and you can blame it on the CTO and the product manager and on many other things. But as an organization, you need to get that right. And when we talk about reliability, we then talk about quality. The quality of a solution, but also whether you have a skill sets to manage that solution, because many solutions are very complex and you need to have those in-house skill sets or work with relevant partners who do have that skill sets. The reliance on others is also problematic. If you're taking control and if you want to assure quality, is where do you rely on others and what is key for you to maintain control over? Okay. And that underlying infrastructure as well. Are the solutions running in certified data centers? Are your networks fit for purpose? All those things impact the reliability issue. A topic which comes up a lot with customers today is sovereignty, and a lot can be said about sovereignty, and is that a key criteria for cloud? I would say yes, but sovereignty is a lot of things. It's about knowing where your data is and where it's processed. Okay. It's about ensuring that you're not locked into specific operating systems and suppliers. It's about having control over what you're doing with your solution. And it's also about having control over how you scale and the costs which are being incurred today, tomorrow, and after tomorrow. Because life is an Excel sheet, and at the end, we're talking about CFO. If it goes down, the CFO is angry. If costs go off, go way out of sync and unpredictable, the CFO also gets angry. So, yeah, I would say quality control, sovereignty are key things we're seeing from research we commissioned and from our customers.
Thank you. And do these differ, would you say, across different markets or different geographies, or is this kind of a global demand shift that we're seeing?
I think reliability has always been there. I think the control and the sovereignty topics are coming up, maybe due to political landscape today, maybe due to the reliance on big tech, and maybe due to costs which are spiraling out of control in some cases. So I think that's new, and in some territories we can see in Europe. Sovereignty is absolutely key now, and it's been talked about and been acted on by the European Commission, and in other countries, where we are, especially in Colombia, we're also seeing an element of, all right, what do we do with data repatriation? How do we in a country manage our infrastructure? So that is. It's out there. It's just at different speeds. Some countries are focused more on it, but I think everybody is getting to that point. So yeah, reliability has always been there. Okay, but the other topics are coming up increasingly.
Yeah, and I guess you kind of brushed on this just a little bit, but I guess a lot of these demands do derive from the limitations of the current market. So James, I'm going to pick on you now for this next question. I pulled a quote from an article you wrote recently, The Cloud's Next Reckoning. And the quote says, once cloud costs become unpredictable, they start to dictate architectural and governance decisions, not because it's the right choice, but because options have been financially constrained. So do you mind diving a little deeper and maybe sharing in what areas are organizations beginning to recognize limitations of these traditional cloud hyperscale models?
Yep, sure. What I think we're seeing now is a shift from early adoption to operational reality. Hyperscale delivered real benefit, speed, flexibility, the ability to scale quickly. But as an organization matures, those trade-offs start to become much clearer. As you've kind of alluded to, firstly, there's cost, usually triggered by the inevitable bill shock. What was sold initially as a pay-as-you-go is increasingly experienced as a pay-without-knowing model. Pricing models with hyperscalers are complex. There's often extra fees which add friction. For a lot of cases where you have steady workloads, the economics often don't hold up. In practice, hyperscale is optimized for elasticity, but most businesses run on predictability. So in many cases, organizations find that because of cost, they're looking at hybrid solutions or even repatriation strategies, so moving off of hyperscalers to alternatives. Secondly, there's control. Hyperscalers are built for standardization, not for customization. That works well if you're fully cloud native, but as soon as you need to tune performance, control network behavior, or optimize storage, you start to feel those constraints. You gain convenience, but you lose control. And at scale, control becomes a requirement, not a preference. Thirdly, jurisdiction is probably the next area. It's no longer just about where your data sits geographically, it's about who can legally access it. Organizations are increasingly uncomfortable with exposure to external legal frameworks, particularly in regulated sectors. Where your data lives matters less than who can access it. And then finally, there's dependencies or vendor lock-in. The deeper you integrate into proprietary services that are typically offered by hyperscalers such as IAM, databases, serverless, the harder it becomes to move or even negotiate away from them. The deeper you go, the harder it gets to get out of that. When you put all that together, the common theme is a mismatch. If your workload is always on, it's high I/O or sensitive from a regulatory perspective, hyperscale often stops being the natural fit. If your workload doesn't scale down, hyperscale stops making sense.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That was super insightful. I do want to bring it back to point 2 that you mentioned about costs. Well, and I guess point 3 on performance and predictability as well. I do want to ask our audience in a quick poll about the costs and limitations of public cloud for your business. I feel like we've all been victims of a cloud outage or cloud performance issues, but we will be sharing a poll in the chat about how much do you think 1 hour of cloud service downtime actually costs. So I will give you a couple of minutes just to submit your answers. Okay. Couple, $200,000, $300,000. Okay. It's a nice mixed bag. I think the majority is aiming higher. Obviously, the cheeky cost at the beginning of sleepless nights. Also not just the monetary and income losses. We're also talking about SLA penalties or loss of client trust or employee productivity as well. Those are all things to consider.
Well, I'll give you, so I'll barge in, but I'll give you an example. A Colombian bank lost all its payment abilities for approximately 2 to 3 days a few months ago, which means that customers weren't able to use a bank to pay suppliers, etc. The cost there, I don't even know what the cost there was, but I'm sure somebody got fired.
So we'll add job loss as well to that initial poll. Okay, we'll wrap up the poll now and put you out of your misery so you can see how much it really does cost. So it's those of you that said $300,000, you are correct. That's just over €250,000. Those of us in Europe. And like I mentioned, this is not just a direct revenue, and Juan mentioned as well, this is, an all-encompassing loss, but this is just for 1 hour as well. And, now moving forward, I think by 2027, we've seen that more than 50% of businesses will be moving towards more private and sovereign cloud platforms to accelerate business operations. And so on that, the next question for whoever is happy to answer is sovereignty has, become something of a buzzword. But how is operational sovereignty actually defined when we talk about the cloud?
Yeah, I can jump in with an initial answer. Operational sovereignty is often misunderstood as simply data residency, but that's only a small part of the picture. In reality, it's about who has control of that data when it actually matters. At the foundation, it is the jurisdiction, but it's just about storing in a region. It's about ensuring that the data, any associated metadata, and the control plane that controls that all operate under a single legal framework without exposure to external reach. Sovereignty isn't where the cloud runs, it's who controls it when it matters. The next layer is operational independence. Can the platform be operated, maintained, and recovered without relying on external vendors or support chains outside that jurisdiction? If the answer is no, then you don't fully control your environment. Access is another critical factor. Many cloud models still allow some level of implicit administration access by the provider. True sovereignty means those privilege boundaries are explicit and tightly controlled. So there's no hidden backdoors, no assumed access. You also need transparency across the stack. That means understanding your hardware or infrastructure, your software, and any dependencies, so you're not exposed to hidden risks in the supply chain. And then there's determinism. Sovereignty environments should have predictability in performance, in cost, and the operation. There's a very different model to multi-tenant hyperscale environments where variability is part of the built-in design. When you bring that together, sovereignty becomes much clearer. It's control over your data, your operations, and your dependencies. Lose any of one of those, and sovereignty starts to break down.
Mm-hmm. And so with sovereignty in mind, Aritza, from your side, on the product side, what does the ideal cloud structure or cloud model look like then in terms of this operational sovereignty, predictable model?
Good afternoon to everyone. First of all, good question from a market product point of view. If you take a look at the past 10 years of the cloud model, we have seen that companies were at the beginning in a private cloud model, then they switched everything to the public cloud. From my point of view, and also Gartner, Flexera reports, the ideal cloud model now it's a flexible one. That means there is no ideal public or private because at the end depends on the customers or the company needs. Okay, for many customers or companies, a shared cloud model, it is more or less same as what the public cloud provides in a hyperscaler like AWS, Azure, and Google. It is a good starting point to start in this shared cloud model because the main benefits for these companies are at the end lower upfront cost, faster deployments and operation, and it is more flexible. Okay, it is a good fit for application or standard workloads for companies that want to grow step by step without a large upfront investment. But at the same time, there are companies and customers at the end that need more control, more predictable performance, as James was talking a few minutes ago, and stronger security and compliance requirements. In these cases, a dedicated cloud model is the better option because its main benefit is a more control and a more isolated environment. So this is where isolation comes into the conversation because it is very, very important. Shared cloud model has by design a logical isolation, and it is enough for some application because they can separate their workloads through software and security control and role-based access controls, IAMs, etc. But for more sensitive and regulated environments, physical isolation, it is needed on top of the logical one. Let me show you at Ilkari, our cloud is deployed in these two cloud models. You can see in the left side of the screen, the shared cloud where, as I was talking before, there is a network at the end because any cloud needs a network to connect to internet or internally. And we have different customers that are isolated logically. But as I was mentioning before, if we have companies or customer at the end with workloads that needs strict regulatory, sovereignty, and compliance requirements, we have a model where it is logical, isolated, and also physical. That means at the end, it is a dedicated hardware, dedicated network for each of the customers. So closing there or answering your question, there is no, the ideal model is a model that it's a flexible combination between shared and dedicated, depending on the customer needs.
Thank you. And specifically the workloads, the flexibility, exactly. Okay, great. I'm gonna open up the floor here again for this next question. Maybe all three of you have a different use case. Maybe one from a more commercial perspective or a more product perspective. Can you share with us a specific use case of an organization that has had to rethink its cloud or infrastructure strategy in general? Maybe you can talk about the why or the results, and how this went about.
Yeah, we have a customer working in the health sector that had to change its infrastructure and the way it was handling customer data due to change in legislation and the requirement to have customer data to be within a specific territory. So that meant they had to repatriate their data, which was actually in the US with a hyperscaler, would you believe it, back to within their country. And that took approximately a year to do, significant cost, and ultimately from the outset they had done things at speed. So they'd created their infrastructure, set up their cloud platform in a hurry, and without thinking, hey, how could things evolve in the future, and what changes we may need to make. So that was an example. The customer had to backpedal, change things, and ultimately maybe the cost savings they made at the beginning by doing things at speed and going with a kind of a hyperscaler solution were at the end offset, or those cost savings were totally fake cost savings, because in the long term they didn't have the flexibility and they had the lock-in. So it was not an easy project for them. So that's an example. I think James has.
Yeah, I've got an example that kind of speaks to some of the ideas I've already shared. We had a customer that was deploying a CI/CD platform, so a system to support their development teams with their software development activities. They initially deployed it onto a hyperscaler, and that's where initially it worked well at a small scale, but as they added more and more pipelines, and it grew in success, that's where they started to see some of the limitations. So they started to see issues with storage, the performance became unpredictable, and it was very difficult to diagnose these issues because of a lot of the abstraction layers that the cloud hid. And didn't really become a problem until the cloud became the problem. At the time, costs were increasing in a way that didn't really align with the value they were gaining from this system. This was a system that was always on, so the properties of the workload was an always on workload, and they weren't really benefiting from elasticity, but they were still paying for that. And that led to a reassessment, and it's not because hyperscalers are inherently wrong, it's because the workloads no longer matched the model. Hyperscale works well until your workloads stop behaving like a cloud workload. So they reassessed and they moved to a more controlled infrastructure-led approach where storage, which was the key bottleneck here, they could tune specifically for their workload patterns, and make it more deterministic. And in doing that, they regained some of that operational control I spoke about. The result was more consistent performance, clearer operational insight, and the costs aligned with the actual capacity that they were consuming. So the key takeaway from that is it wasn't an ideological decision. It was a reality of the type of workloads they were deploying. So at scale, the question isn't just can the cloud run this, it's can we run this in the cloud on our own terms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I mean, on that as well, my understanding is that it's not just necessarily, is it one or the other, or maybe it is, but for anyone who is rethinking their infrastructure, does a hybrid model make sense anymore then, or should it be a controlled private sovereign cloud instance, or how does that look like?
I think it depends. There isn't a right or wrong approach with this. There isn't a one size fits all solution. It's very dependent on your business, the risks, the outside influences. So public cloud's very good for certain things, like if you need to put edge type workloads, so things like your websites, front end components, it's very good with that. It's going to be very costly to have a number of private or sovereign cloud deployments around the world if you're a global business, but leveraging some of the hyperscalers for content delivery is probably a more cost effective route to do that. But if you've got high storage requirements, heavy lifting, then that's where there's question marks over whether a hyperscaler is the right solution for you. And then when you overlay things like jurisdictional or regulatory requirements, that's where actually a hybrid approach may be more beneficial to you.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you just kind of touched on that as well, and this can be for anyone. But in terms of sectors that are likely to be, let's say, moving forward the fastest with more kind of this private or more flexible structure, which sectors do you think, other than just not just regulated markets, but are there any sectors that you see that will be moving forward the fastest when it comes to adapting their cloud infrastructure?
I think it really depends. I mean, you mentioned regulated sectors. I think that's really where they're more conscious about that. So banking, iGaming are two that spring to mind, where they probably want to be very careful about where they're putting their workloads, where their data's stored, who has access to it, who has control to it. So I think they're the ones that probably need to think long and hard about those strategies and where they're deploying their infrastructure that's ultimately running their business.
Yeah. Thank you. Rita, what about, for example, in the case of, like a smaller, a lot of the data we've talked about has been around mid-market and enterprises, but for smaller businesses or maybe, a SaaS company or starting to build a new project, what do you see being the ideal model for there? Is sovereignty still relevant for smaller businesses?
Absolutely, yes, because at the end, sovereignty is not only important for government or large enterprises company. At the end, small business, SMBs or SaaS companies, at the end, they also manage customer data, business information, and they have legal responsibility. Sometimes these SMBs or small medium companies works for a large company with regulated and compliance requirement, and their providers need to be also compliant with. So at the end, sovereignty means as a company, any company, large, medium, or small, where my data is stored, who controls it, and which law is applying to. And I am able to work with, at the end, customer or other business because of regulation and compliance requirements. So yes, for me, sovereignty matters for small, medium too, because of trust, control, and compliance that is important on every size, any company.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I've just seen the time. We will be wrapping up soon. I do have one final question, but we will have some time for Q&A in just a couple of minutes. So if you do have any burning questions, get them in the chat now, and we'll answer them at the end. But Juan, this last one's for you, and obviously anyone else that wants to jump in. For organizations that are beginning to reassess their current cloud approach, what would be the first step or steps to take in terms of rethinking this infrastructure?
Probably a glass of whiskey just to steady the nerves, because you might be taking business critical systems offline. I think you need to be pragmatic. And when you're looking at your infrastructure, you'll probably never get away totally from where you are today. You need to understand what are the weaknesses, what are the strengths of what you're using today, and what exactly you're trying to gain out of this, whether it's control, whether it's sovereignty, and where you need to apply it. The way I usually, when I'm talking to customers, ideally I'd tell them, hey, move everything away from your legacy infrastructure, move it onto our cloud platform and into our data centers. That's not going to happen, right? They need to go step by step. So generally what I propose is start with a greenfield project. Okay, set out what your objectives are, whether they're control, sovereignty, cost, predictability, etc. Spin something new as a greenfield project. Select the technologies and the solutions, learn how to use them, and test that out in a lower risk environment. And only then can you then start understanding, all right, if I'm gonna rethink my cloud infrastructure, I now have this experience, I know how these systems work, I know how this technology works, and then I can go through it. Ultimately, you will probably end up with a mix, and it's important that there's a link, and that whatever you're spinning up, whatever new solution you're spinning up, will probably have to communicate to your existing cloud infrastructure, and then you'll start migrating slowly and surely away from it. But you rarely migrate totally away from something. There's always something left over. But yeah, I would start with greenfield projects, and just get to grips with that before attacking the main cloud infrastructure business critical elements, just to gain that experience. And be able to then with confidence go to the board and say, hey, I need this investment and this is why I need it, and these are the options we're taking.
Perfect. Thank you. I mean, my key takeaway from that answer was, whiskey first. No, but no, thank you. That was really, really very clear. Thank you so much. And I do think that we are almost out of time. So the Q&A is open. I think we have, how many questions do we have? Well, Margaret, Aritza answered your sovereignty question. And we have, okay. How does AI influence cloud infrastructure?
Well, I can jump into this question, sorry, because I was on mute. Definitely it is influencing let's say the end-to-end cloud model, not only because nowadays we can see the increasing in demand of GPUs, memory, compute, not only from the hyperscaler point of view and also from the companies like OpenAI, Anthropic and any other companies. So it increased the demand, as I'm saying. Secondly, it creates more demand also on storage, and storage. Why storage? Because at the end, if you want to train your model, you need data at the end, and data needs to be stored somewhere. So storage is also increasing. High-speed networking, because you need to process very high amount of data. And third, and this is where facilities data center provider comes into the room also, because it is more pressure from them in terms of power, cooling, and infrastructure efficiency. Kilowatts per rack have been changing in the past years from 5-7 kilowatts up to 10, 15, 20. All this is because of the AI impacting, as I'm saying, the cloud infrastructure design, because in the past years, there were models in AI doing analytics, big data, but now the demand is increasing, and there is no stop at the end. So from my point of view, it influences not only what we see as final customer, it influences the whole chain or supply chain of cloud.
Great, thank you. I think we only have one more that's come in the chat. How is low latency guaranteed in cloud environments?
I can say that. I mean, ultimately, it's not. If you want complete control, then you need to be running on bare metal. I think the challenge with the hyperscalers is there's often so many layers of abstraction between your workload and the underpinning infrastructure. It's very difficult to get deterministic I/O. So if you're in a latency sensitive business, then that can be a challenge for you. I think if you look at more private or sovereign clouds, they tend to have less abstraction between your workload and the underpinning infrastructure. So that gives you more guarantees over the performance. But at the end of the day, if you are very latency sensitive in your business, owning the infrastructure end to end is the only real way to guarantee that latency.
Okay. Thank you. I do think that's all we have time for now, but if you have any more questions, then feel free to respond to the email reminders that you got sent, or reach out to any of us on LinkedIn. And before you all leave, just a couple of words from my side. We did, as the speakers have pertained to, we have launched our own sovereign private cloud. So if anyone would be interested in seeing how both shared or dedicated instances could work for a specific use case, or even how our collocation cloud and domain services work together, then feel free to scan the QR code that will pop up on your screen now. And we are just kicking off this webinar series. So we have a poll that we're showing in the chat, a couple of polls coming up as well about upcoming topics, anything you'd be interested in learning about, as well as some topics coming soon. And feel free to let us know how valuable you found today's session as well. So thank you all. Thank you, speakers, experts. It's been great to have this conversation with you. And thanks to everyone who joined us today and who participated as well. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Have a great day. Thank you.